No, hey, we were happy to see the Colonel and the General together. Here, here. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you all here today and call this unclassified hearing of the House Armed Services Committee Readiness Subcommittee on the current state of the United States Marine Corps to order. The consistent theme of the 115th Congressional Session of the House Armed Services Committee is to continue the drumbeat of our current state of overall military readiness, and in many cases where we're not providing necessary resources to enable power projection and exercise the principle I strongly believe, and that is peace through strength. The Marine Corps currently has over 20% of its active duty force deployed in 37 countries, so you clearly play an integral part in deterring adversaries and reassuring our allies. And even today, with the chemical attack in Syria, it's actually reassuring to me to know that there is a presence that can help the people of that war-torn, tragic country. Over the past several weeks, both of our full committee and this subcommittee have listened keenly to briefings and hearings from leading national security experts and senior military leaders describing the current threats we face and the current state of the military. After listening to these sobering assessments, there's no question in my mind we're sadly indeed in a readiness crisis. In addition, earlier this morning, we received testimony from each of the service chiefs on the consequences of another continuing resolution. This continuing resolution would only worsen the damage to our military and its readiness. The Marine Corps provides our nation with a versatile set of capabilities, ranging from crisis response, amphibious operations, and theater security cooperation. We must assist your efforts to restore readiness where it is lacking for today's threats and integrate necessary skills to address tomorrow's challenges. I am personally concerned about the lasting impacts incurred as a result of the Marine Corps prioritization, quote, near-term readiness, end of quote, at the expense of other areas such as capacity, capability, modernization, and facility sustainment. I believe the first responsibility of the federal government is to secure its citizens, and therefore it is our duty to better understand the readiness situation the Marine Corps finds it in, and then aid in that recovery. This is especially appropriate since the originally required by the 82nd Congress and subsequently affirmed by the 114th Congress, the Marine Corps is the, quote, nation's expeditionary force of readiness, end of quote. This afternoon, we are honored and grateful to have Lieutenant Colonel Ron Bailey, United States Marine Deputy Commandant, Plans, Policies, and Operations. We have Lieutenant General Mike Dana, the U.S. Marine Corps Deputy Commandant of Installations and Logistics, and Senior Executive Servant William E. Taylor, the Assistant Deputy Commandant for Aviation. I want to thank each of you for your admirable and extraordinary service to the Corps and this nation. I believe it is worth noting that our panel, I mean, this is amazing, has 110 years of combined experience. And this will be extremely helpful as this subcommittee seeks to address readiness challenges moving forward. We now ask the senior leaders of the Marine Corps here today to offer us their candid and best military advice related to the current state of readiness, which includes home station facilities, deployed force capabilities, and those units training to be the next to go forward in harm's way. We look forward to hearing from our witnesses, and thank you for testifying today as you highlight the current state of the Marine Corps readiness. I now would like to turn to the ranking member, Representative Joe Courtney from Connecticut, for any opening remarks he would like to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would only edit your comment by saying I'm the temporary ranking member of the subcommittee because Mrs. Bordillo, again, is back home in Guam taking care of some family affairs and obviously other work in her home district. She has a written statement, which, again, I would just, again, ask to be entered for the record. She did ask me just to read a very brief comment as well, which is that she, again, is unable to be here today, but she communicated that she is looking forward to seeing the Marine realignment to Guam continue forward without delay. The Marine Corps and the Department of Defense should take necessary steps to ensure that the challenges are being promptly and adequately addressed. So I'm sure it's going to come as a great shock to all of us that she did want to talk about Guam a little bit in her comments here. And again, I had a chance to meet with these gentlemen in the office and want to, again, thank them for the great testimony you're about to prepare here today. General Neller, again, did an excellent job this morning. It's my understanding he flew in at 5 o'clock this morning from overseas and got to the committee. So he deserves bonus points for, again, his efforts this morning and his concise comments, which was also really, I think, very effective in terms of his presentation here. So, again, thank you, again, to the witnesses, and with that, I would yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Courtney, and indeed we are really grateful for the service of Delegate Madeline Badallo. At this time of the year, she provides a report to the people of Guam, and so it's a tradition that she so effectively represents the very patriotic people of the territory of Guam. Now we will be proceeding with the combined opening statement from the panel being delivered by Lieutenant General Bailey.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chairman Wilson, Ranking Member Courtney, and distinguished members of the House Armed Service Subcommittee on Readiness. On behalf of Lieutenant General Dana, Mr. Taylor, and I, we thank you for the opportunity to appear here today and report on the readiness of your United States Marine Corps. Congress and the American people have high expectations for the Marine Corps as our nation's naval expeditionary force in readiness. As we sit here today, there are over 34,000 Marines deployed in 37 countries around the globe to assure our allies and partners, to deter our adversaries, and to respond when our nation's citizens and interests are threatened. While today's force is capable and our forward deployed forces are ready to fight, we are physically stretched to maintain readiness across the breadth of the force in near term and to modernize for future readiness against the threats we will face. Rebuilding a balanced Marine Corps will require both near-term actions and also longer-term efforts. To rebalance our readiness for current operations and future contingencies, it will require both time and sufficient, consistent, and predictable funding. On behalf of all of our Marines, sailors, civilians, and their families, we thank the Congress and this committee for the support that you have provided and for this opportunity to discuss the key challenges your Marine Corps faces. We look forward to your questions, sir.
General, thank you very much. And Mr. Warren is going to keep us strictly on a 5-minute rule, and so we'll begin with me at 5 minutes. And indeed, today, General, it's such a chilling reminder of what we face. The chemical weapons used in Syria by the Assad regime, which has been propped up by the Russian Federation and the regime in Tehran, the Iranian regime. And then virtually simultaneously, as the President of China is here to visit with President Trump, it's no surprise that North Korea has another missile launch. And somehow you would hope that the People's Republic would understand that the instability in North Korea and Pyongyang is really a threat to them too. But again, the Marine Corps has never been more important as we face challenges around the world. And this is the same time there was a terrorist attack with mass killings by Islamic terrorist extremists in Pakistan. And this is after, of course, the attack on the subway system in St. Petersburg, Russia. And again, a chilling reminder this week of what you face and the courage and bravery of our U.S. Marine Corps. Under the Bipartisan Budget Act and the Budget Control Act funding levels, what are the hardest readiness choices that you continue to have to make, and what impact do these have on your ability to meet mission requirements in the National Defense Strategy? And please provide specific examples. And General Bailey, you and first, and then your colleagues.
Sir, the most difficult readiness challenges that we have centers around the framework that we've established when we look at readiness. That is high-quality people. And when you think about the challenge that we have, it's very, very important that we have the opportunity to recruit high-quality people. When we're operating off of a budget that's in CR, then we can't dedicate the money that we need towards that. In addition to that, we look at capability and capacity. And so, just as you described all of those challenges that are out there, those threats that are out there, when you start talking capability and capacity, when you do not have the funds to, one, develop a force to be able to counteract that, that creates a tremendous challenge for our forces. We have clearly recognized that we are devoting money and time towards those forces that are deployed and preparing to deploy. But in order for us to continue, we need to have a budget that's predictable, reliable. And one other thing that I would like to add to that before I turn to my colleagues is that when we start talking modernization of our equipment, that is a big challenge for us. You've got to have modernized equipment. The enemy that we face, as you described, is an enemy that's in complex terrain. That enemy can also cut us off when we start talking electromagnetic spectrum. They have capabilities now to detect signatures. That enemy can also fire long-range precision fires. And so we need modernized equipment to be able to compete on a battlefield so that we can stay at the top and stay at the top of our game.
And
So if I could add to that, as we look at World War II, and General Milley talked about that today, that's a three-dimension fight, sea, air, and land, and now we have space and cyber. And as we look at our near-peer competitors and the weapons that they can bring to bear, we require more standoff distance, and we need to be more distributed. So as we look at that modernization effort, we look at all our shoot, move, and communicate platforms, the only things that are getting refreshed or that we're actually getting new platforms for are the ACV, JLTV, and Gator radar. And I forgot to mention up front, we appreciate every penny you give us because we're good stewards of the taxpayer dollars. So when I'm bringing these requirements up, we appreciate whatever you can provide us. So in that new, what I call extended battle space, we need these new capabilities like the 53K, the MV-22, the ACV, to ensure that we can have the standoff distance and then be able to go ashore and then have the capability to move logistics ashore with, again, with platforms like the 53K, and we're looking at unmanned platforms also. The other thing I'd bring up is we plan on a 5-year window with our equipment and with our facilities, and we have a very rigorous process. The Commandant holds my feet to the fire. We can't waste any money. And when we develop that plan and you have either sequestration, a CR, a reduction in funding, it throws the plan off track. So thank you for listening.
Thank you.
And on the aviation side, our biggest risk is in our ability to balance future readiness versus current readiness. Future readiness is derived through sustainable readiness as a function of recapitalization. Not too many people think of it in that terms, but recapitalization isn't just for the purpose of fielding capability. It's also for the purpose of fielding sustainable readiness as compared to what we call tired iron. The legacy aircraft, for instance, the 53 Echo, on average, the 53 Echo is 28 years old. I was a member of the unit that first sent the 53 Echo on its first operational deployment, and that was 34 years ago. And then there's the F-18. The F-18 we are struggling to maintain again. Several variants of the F-18 are 28 years old, and just the fundamental material condition of the aircraft is almost unmanageable at this point. We send it to the depot, they peel back a panel, they find corrosion, they peel back another panel. There's been, to my knowledge, at least half a dozen F-18s recently that were inducted into the depot only to be stricken halfway through when they realized it's not even salvageable. So we're balancing the criticality of getting out of tired iron and fielding our new aircraft as soon as possible versus current readiness. Current readiness being our readiness accounts. They have been under-resourced consistently over a period of about 12 years now, whereas a sustainable level of readiness in terms of those readiness accounts is around 85%. Over those 12 years, the readiness levels have deteriorated in those counts to an aggregate level of about 67%. So that equates to our inability to support the legacy aircraft we have on the flight line. And that has manifested itself in deteriorating non-mission capable supply rates. So in other words, of the aircraft that are available on the flight line today, in the aggregate, 23% of our inventory on the flight line is not available due to parts. And that percentage actually masks the fact that that metric is agnostic to how many parts that aircraft is down for. So it assumes it's one part, when in fact it can be multiple parts after constant cannibalization by the maintainers to try and keep a certain percentage of aircraft up. So our biggest risk is balancing future readiness through procurement of new aircraft so that we can have sustainable readiness versus current readiness in robustly funding those readiness accounts.
And thank each of you for your clarity. We now proceed to Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I said earlier, I had a chance to meet with the panel earlier, so I'm going to defer my questions for now to Congresswoman Gabbard, who's next in line.
And Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard from Hawaii.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here and for your service. I want to bounce a little bit off of Mr. Taylor's comments mentioning aviation readiness. This is something that has been identified as an area of acute need, both with the aircraft and the maintenance, but as well as the ability for our pilots to have enough training hours, to have the experience they need to complete their missions. Can you talk a little bit about the plan to get to where we need to be in both of those respects with regard to aviation, and how either a CR or a supplemental will impact the execution of that plan?
Okay, I'll take that first one. So marine aviation is about 2.5 years into a readiness recovery plan. Our ultimate objective is to have 1,065 aircraft available on the flight line, not necessarily up, but available for maintenance, available for training, available to support operational plans. Where we are right now is we have about 983, so we're about 82 short of that goal. The intent is to achieve that 1,065 and have what they call a ready bench around the 2022 timeframe. So we have an interim goal of what they call ready basic aircraft, and that essentially means the aircraft is up and available for training or tasking. And our goal is an interim goal of fiscal year 2020 to have about 589 of those aircraft available for tasking. We're currently sitting at about 433, or 156 short. So that's really talking about current readiness. So that's really talking about our readiness accounts. And I could just refer you to, if we go long term, what this means in terms of specific accounts. I'll just pick out a couple to give you an idea. If we continue down this path of a full year CR, or we don't get the supplemental, here's just a comparison. For the aircraft depot maintenance account, we're talking 84% versus 88% funding levels. The air system support is essentially what Naval Air Systems Command uses to pay their engineers, to take care of engineering issues, logistics issues, to monitor the airworthiness of an aircraft. We're talking about 58% versus 93%. So a big dip there. And then aviation logistics, that's our 1A, 9A account as we call it. That's essentially what we pay for like PBL services and such. And on that one, we're talking about 80% versus 94%. And the biggest one, I earlier referred to our biggest risk on the current readiness being spares. The difference would be 73% versus 88%. So that's probably the most significant one aside from the air system support. Spares at 73% versus 88%.
Thank you. General Dana.
I'm from New York, so I'm going to talk fast because I've got 1:30, but there's 3 quick points I'd like to bring up. If you look at our depot funding over the past 10 years, we have been funding to 80% of the requirement. So that means is 20% of that work is being deferred and pushed to the right. And anytime we have interruption in funding, it really impacts the schedule in a negative way. The other thing is in 2013, when we had the furlough, it did 2 things. 888 pieces of gear were not inducted for maintenance that were critical to the shoot, move, and communicate portfolio that I talked to previously. Plus, we broke faith with the workers, because just to retain our, our artisans, our skilled workers, I mean, it's a very close relationship that we have. We have education programs for them. We do a lot to mature them and grow them. And then when you furlough them, they look at you and go, "What are you doing? You're breaking faith."
I would like to add that in all of that, it comes home to me because I need those aircraft to train. Yeah. And so when those aircraft are not available for us to train with, that creates a tremendous amount of challenges for a portion of the Marine Air Ground Task Force. And that task force cannot conduct all this training to be ready for the missions to support requirements that may be deemed by the National Command Authority or Combatant Commander.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Congresswoman Gabbard. We now proceed to Congressman Austin Scott of Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for your service. 110 years, that's a long time in anybody's book. So we've been honored to have you. General Bailey, many of my constituents work at the Marine Corps Logistics Base in Albany. Some are even family over there, although I don't tell the command over there when I'm visiting. The work that's performed at those depots is key to the fight and enabling the war fighter and our readiness. The impact in the current budget environment on readiness that we keep talking about, what specific challenges do you face with the Marine depots operating at current capacities and being able to successfully execute the maintenance missions?
Congressman, we have an expert here who works in that field. So I'm going to pass that question off to him because he has spent the bulk of his career working in that area.
General Dana.
So the biggest challenge, and we're going to foot stomp this all day today, and we really appreciate you listening, is stable, uninterrupted, consistent funding so we can do our 5-year planning window. The Commandant has told us, he has given direction that we will know what equipment we have, what condition it's in, and what we need to do to sustain it. And I have to provide him a brief and walk through all our depot requirements for all of our equipment. And when I lay out that 5-year plan, sir, and then we don't get the funding or we're funded to 80% or the funding is interrupted, the schedule blows apart. Now, where I'm seeing that is in our top 25 items that I mentioned earlier, our shoot, move, and communicate, that, for instance, AAVs are at 65% readiness across the Marine Corps. I mean, that's our main connector to get to the beach in an amphibious operation or an expeditionary operation. We're looking at LAV readiness around 70%, tanks around high 70s. So all these critical warfighting assets just keep, it's slow, but it's gradual, it's discernible, and it's measurable, and we're seeing the impact of readiness. So what we're asking for, whatever money we get, we'll use it wisely, we'll plan accordingly, but we just need consistent funding.
General Dana, I'm going to hang with you for a second. As you know, there was recently significant storm damage to the infrastructure at the Marine Corps Logistics Base in Albany. We've got big storms on the ground right now in that area. As you know, there are only 2 depot sites. A lot of talk about BRAC concerns people in the area. We obviously have one on the East Coast, one on the West. One, would you talk about where we are specifically with the cleanup in Albany? What do you need from us to get back to full capacity? And then why is it so crucial to have 2 depots?
Great questions, thank you. Having the 2 depots, I mean, it's been proven by this unfortunate tornado, which inflicted $100 million worth of facilities damage on the Albany depot. Thank God no one was hurt. It was on a Sunday. We didn't have any workers. Today we sent the workers home because we're in a high state of storm alert down in Albany, so we're making sure we're taking care of the workforce. So as we look at the depots, we're working very hard to get after this issue, we moved $45 million in facility sustainment reorganization money to work on the current damage to Albany, but that takes away from another account for other bases. So we also, sir, have the $233 billion in equipment damage at Albany, which will be another bill, but we're looking at that very closely to make sure that that's an accurate number before we come to Congress. So in review, $100 million on the facility side, $233 on the equipment side, and we're taking care of the workforce.
Well, thank you for your service, and thank you for the time and to discuss these issues in our office and how we can be more efficient with the taxpayer dollars. And gentlemen, I appreciate all of your service, and don't know how much time I have left, but I'm pretty sure it's not 5 minutes. But so I'll yield whatever time.
And thank you very much, Congressman Scott. And indeed, our thoughts and prayers are with the people of Georgia and South Carolina today as they're under a tornado and storm alert and watch.
Chairman, we have there are four tornadoes on the ground in my district right now. Is what I've just
an extraordinary storm coming through toward capital city of Columbia and Lexington, Aiken. We now proceed to Congressman Salud Carbajal of California.
Thank you, Chairman Wilson and Ranking Member Courtney, and thank you to all of you for addressing us today. And thank you for your service, most of all. I believe we are all in agreement in terms of the negative impacts of sequestration and how Congress' inability to pass an actual budget is making it difficult for the Marines, along with all other services, to execute any type of good planning. Last month, the full committee held a hearing on the state of the military, where I expressed my concerns not only in regards to sequestration, but also how we are going to balance the growing defense budget versus a shrinking domestic agenda. The Marine Corps conducted a bottom-up review of the force entitled Marine Corps Force 2025. During this review, did the Corps take any steps to identify wasteful spending and possible efficiencies? And if it did, can you provide us with some examples? Additionally, a part of readiness is investing in our infrastructure, as was touched on earlier. What are some immediate infrastructure needs the Marine Corps has identified?
Sir, let me start with Marine Corps Force 2025. Our Commandant had taken the time to kind of look at the threat. So Marine Corps Intelligence Activity put together an assessment that stated that in 2025, these are the capabilities that we're going to need in order to be competitive, to be able to compete with our adversaries. So in this review, and it's still going on, he's looking at all aspects of our Corps in terms of the organization of our Corps, the number of our different squad sizes, the logistics, the aviation. So he's looking completely across the Corps. In that, in his look, it's looking to see where we can gain efficiencies. And the reason we need to gain efficiencies is because we've got to develop a skill set. And the skill set that we need, we've determined that we need about 3,000 Marines to fulfill that skill set. That skill set in cyber, that skill set in information operations, that skill set to have someone who maintains the ability to identify electromagnetic signature, release, and on and on and on. So in that process, we have all looked across at the Marine Air Ground Task Force from a ground combat element side, from a logistics side, from an aviation side, and from the command element side. And I can assure you we will gain some efficiencies, and that in itself will cut back on wasteful activity. From the infrastructure side, I'm going to turn to my counterpart here and let him talk about infrastructure.
Sir, great question. On the efficiency side, or making sure we know what we have and we're spending it wisely, the Commandant has directed that we conduct 149 we call phase modes. I know you remember what one of those are, but it's a supply and maintenance inspection to make sure that we know everything that we have and that if people are using the proper procedures to have accountability for equipment, how they're spending money. And those reports are briefed out to him personally by me. If you get a good grade, it's good for that commander. If you don't, it's a bad day for that commander. Next, on the infrastructure, we have an infrastructure installation reset strategy, where we're looking at our entire portfolio, the 24 bases and stations. And what we do is we look at consolidation, demolition, refurbishment, and new build. That plan is briefed to the Commandant. So every penny that we're spending, he's vetting the entire plan on what we're doing with our facilities.
Thank you very much. I thought you were going to tell me you got rid of hurry up and wait in the Marine Corps. Mr. Chair, I yield back. Thank you very much.
And Congressman Carbajal, thank you very much for your insight. And we now proceed to Congresswoman Vicki Hartzler of Missouri.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for your service in difficult times. I wanted to follow up on some of the earlier discussion about the aviation shortfalls and ask you to just start off and review with me, maybe, Mr. Taylor, where we're at in the process of transitioning to the F-35s and how many are coming online, how many F-18s are you still operating with, how many are able to fly at any given day, and kind of give the transition plan there again.
Okay, as far as the transition, I believe we currently have inventory of 45. We have 3 operational squadrons at this point. The transition goes through the transition end date, or FOC, goes through 2031 based on assumptions with respect to the procurement profile and rate. The biggest struggle is whether or not our F-18 fleet can be maintained that long. General Davis has recently made a decision to revise the transition plan, whereas it was previously a mix of transitioning Harrier squadrons and Hornet squadrons. He's reprioritized based on the material condition of the Hornet, and he's made a definite decision that the next 3 transition squadrons will be F-18s and potentially the next 5. Because of some of the things we've done to invigorate the health of the Harrier, that's one of the least of our problems right now. So we believe we can get the Harrier to the finish line in its current state by monitoring it. It was, in fact, our first type model series that we put through an independent readiness review to make recommendations as to how to sustain it long term. So at this point, it's whether or not the F-18s can last that long.
So are you asking for some new F-18s to fill in the meanwhile?
We are not asking for new F-18s. We don't have a requirement for that. In fact...
Well, the Navy asked for unfunded requirements, so...
Yes, they did.
No.
General Davis's view of this is, why would we want a 4th-generation fighter, another one? Okay. The F-35 is a 5th-generation fighter. We've already accommodated 4th-generation requirements by procuring over 380 H-1 aircraft that also include the AH-1 attack aircraft. So we have 4th-generation capability, level of effort. So we're...
I'm sorry to cut you off at limited time. So let's talk about the parts issue, though, because this is really serious, what you were sharing.
Yes.
You know, about they open them up and, you know, it's not even worth fixing. We've had issues. I have Whiteman Air Force Base with the B-2s having the parts.
Right.
We've been working on the parts sustainability. So what are you taking any efforts to try to get the parts that you need for these F-18s to help carry over?
So I mentioned the independent readiness review for the Harrier. That was the first of 5 that have now been executed. After completing an independent readiness review for the 53, after Harrier, we did the 53, we did the V-22, we did the H-1, we did a ground safety mishap review, and now we're about T-minus a month away from launching an independent readiness review of the Legacy Hornet.
Okay, that's great. I'm going to switch real fast my last minute to talk about
the real answer is to get out of the Legacy Hornet business as fast as possible and transition to the F-35.
Okay, okay. End strength. So Congress has authorized the Marine Corps to halt its end strength drawdown during fiscal year 2017, but the current continuing resolution does not fund the Marine Corps at this level. And Secretary Mattis wrote in January of this year a guidance that the President's budget request for FY18 will, quote, grow force structure at the maximum responsible rate. So what is the maximum responsible rate the Marine Corps can grow by, and how big does the Marine Corps need to be to carry out its current missions and potential contingencies?
Ma'am, thank you very much for that question. As I mentioned earlier, we looked at the 3,000 as the Marines that we needed to give us a capability for a 2025 fight. The Commandant has stated that 3,000 Marines per year is the way we plan on bringing in new recruits and Marines to build up the capability that we need. And so that's the responsible way to do that when you start talking, keeping high quality Marines in our Corps, and so that we can provide the nation the crisis reaction force that you expect us to have. So that's the direction that we're going at this point.
Time's expired. Thank you very much. Yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman Hartzler. We now proceed to Congressman Trent Kelly of Mississippi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today and answering these questions. I want to start with, I heard Task Force Smith in Korea was what happens when we're not ready to meet the challenges of today. I've brought this up in a full committee hearing, but I think so many of the American people don't understand that regardless of how well trained and how much heart you guys as Marines have, if we don't have the right equipment, the right munitions, the right amount of equipment that works, the right repair parts, it doesn't matter if we have a next generation, an F-35 in waiting, when the enemy will not wait until we're ready to attack. And if they're a smart enemy, they will attack while we're not ready, which is what we would do. And so I'm so scared with all this BCA and sequestration and all these things that people are failing to understand that we're at critical risk in this nation of asking our armed services to take massive casualties because we are not giving them the right amount of dollars to have the right munitions, the right equipment, the right parts, and the right training to meet those objectives on the day. I think, Mr. Taylor, you said, or it may have been you, Lieutenant General Bailey, about 65 to 70% OR rate among many of our, to get our Marines, the equipment they use to get from the ships to the beach. Is that correct? Is that? Okay.
65%.
Now, going back to the time when I was a lieutenant and a company commander and a battalion commander and all those things pre-9/11, battalion commanders and brigade commanders and division commanders got fired if they had an operational readiness rate, an OR rate of less than 90% in many cases. But now it's acceptable to have equipment at 65 to 70% because that's the best we can do. Is that correct?
Sure, how I'd like to address that is, it's a great question. As we look at the war plans and you look at the Korea set, and I won't get into a lot of detail, but that's a very demanding logistics and equipment plan that, based on our Korean War experience. Just to give you an order of magnitude, as you look at General MacArthur in the Pacific, the logistics that he needed for that fight was 83% less than was used in Korea. And that fight generated a cost of $157 billion. So as we look at across our portfolio, we need $11.2 billion for modernization of our equipment to get us where we need to be. That's the new fielding I talked about and refreshing our other equipment. We need $9 billion in facility sustainment readiness modernization because the bases and stations are our platforms to deploy from and get people out. So if we get that funding, we'll be on a higher step. But what I will say, and I think the Commandant who's sitting here and General Bailey would say, is we're the fight tonight force. We've got what we've got. We'll do the best we can with it. But if you give us this funding, we'll be more expeditionary, more capable, more punch on the other end.
And a CR without the supplemental and even just not doing the appropriations process like it is, that does not get you any closer to being able to modernize and equip our Marines that go into the fight at the level that they deserve to be. Is that correct?
Sir, that is correct. And let me just kind of go down. We're talking about the CR and the supplemental. And so here's what We're talking loss of active duty Marines. We're going to have to cancel reserve force drills. We'll have to stop our CONUS flights. We'll cease the recovery from the tornado down in Albany. We'll lose one amphibious ship. It'll reverse modernization. It'll push us back. And then Mike just talked about the facilities aspect of it. But those are the things that if we don't get the supplemental, that will be impeded and create challenges for us there.
And I think this is you, Lieutenant General Dana, but one thing, we talk about standoff a lot. And I understand what standoff is because I'm an engineer and I'm a military guy and spent some time. I don't think most civilians, though, or most people understand what standoff really is. And so I'm going to try to explain it, and you tell me if I'm right. It is the whatever weapon system we're talking about, the range, like 2,500 meters for a tank, if we want to use that, at which it has a 50-50 chance of hitting an enemy target. And if the enemy has 3,000 meters and we have 2,500, that 500 meters difference is the standoff, the distance where he can kill us, but we can't kill him back. Is that true?
Sir, you nailed it.
And right now, because of munitions and lack of fifth-generation fighters, those kind of things create more standoff for the enemy, especially in some areas like artillery, and that we have the capabilities, but we right now don't have the equipment to take care of that standoff. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. On target.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much, and I yield back, and thank you, gentlemen.
So let me add something to that also, because in addition to that standoff, and we've said this over the years, that our adversaries have not sat idle. And while we were engaged in combat for the past 15 years, they have been developing their capability and developing the capability to allow them to be able to work in the cyber world, have standoff, have precision weapons. And so that is what we are pushing towards when we start saying we need the money for modernization to be competitive against our adversaries.
Thank you, Congressman Kelly, and thank you for your military engineering insight. And now we proceed to someone with a military aviation insight, Congresswoman Martha McSally of Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony. We talked this morning in the full committee about the impact of a CR. Those of us who are here are obviously, I don't want to speak for everybody else, but we're very committed and understand the impacts on the military. As we look at the timing, obviously we need to fund the government and the DOD by the end of April to get off the CR, but then there's a supplemental issue, the supplemental request. Can you give a sense of, I know immediately is probably the answer, but the supplemental resources, is there if we don't get that solved by the middle of May, let's just assume we pass the FY17 in an omnibus or cromnibus or whatever for the baseline, but now we're dealing with a supplemental. If we don't get that by, a certain date, like this is when you're really in a crisis. I'm just trying to understand the impact of the prioritizations here and better understand when we really need to be getting that supplemental done. And I know earlier is always better, but can you give us a good sense of the impacts of?
On the aviation side, I can really only speak to the impact of continuing the CR for the whole year. And the Commandant essentially nailed that this morning.
Yeah, we got that. I'm talking about the timing
August.
of the supplemental now.
Right. I can't help you with the supplemental.
Okay. Any other insights on baseline funding?
As you know, ma'am, just no new starts. I mean, in the MILCOM realm.
No, again, assume we pass a omnibus bill to fund the government, which includes the FY17 DOD appropriations before the end of April. Yeah. Then there is a DOD supplemental for the FY17 as well. I'm asking specifically, I'm not talking about a CR anymore, the timing of the supplemental money and what that does to you. Does that make sense?
Ma'am, let me take that for the record because you're asking specific dates and times. I understand your question.
Yeah, we heard this morning, for example, if we are on a CR, airplanes are going to be grounded starting in June. So there was a very specific thing related to a CR. I'm now saying, let's just say we get this first landmine out of the way of funding the government for FY17. Supplemental versus not supplemental, we need to understand that impact and timing. That would really help us as we're working with our colleagues here.
I can give you a partial answer on the aviation side.
Yep.
However, trying to tie it to a direct date is
challenging.
Is kind of cloudy because of I can't predict whether or not they'll be able to make fourth quarter contract awards. Yep. I won't be able to predict whether or not it's marked as a result of the late award. But in terms of numbers, we're talking 3 V-22s, 4 C-12s, 2 C-40s, 53
In the
Echo
supplemental.
degraded visual environment.
Got it.
MV22 CC RAM. It's an attempt to try and take 77 configurations and consolidate around one configuration. So there are impacts. I just don't know if I'm able to tie them to a direct date.
Got it.
I'd have to have a crystal.
And are you all agnostic as to whether they're together or passed in separate vehicles? Is that Mox Nix to you guys?
If they're passed separate, we just want to make sure it's passed.
Okay, got it. Thanks. Mr. Taylor, back to the aviation issues. Your assumptions on the F-18s for the transition of the F-35, obviously concerning based on what you talked about, that every time they go in for maintenance, you peel back and you see it worse and worse. Media reports saying you're pulling a couple dozen out of the boneyard.
It's actually upwards of 23, perhaps.
Okay, 23. That's close to a couple dozen,
within.
isn't it? Going out of the boneyard to address that. But the sunset date is still 2018 for the F-18, right? What are you doing between, or what's the
Negative.
All right, so talk through how you sustain the F-18 until it's completely replaced by the F-35, and what are the assumptions?
It's an art, not a
good?
science.
Yeah.
I'll start with that statement. So they've already extended the service life of the Legacy Hornet twice, once beyond 8,000 and once to 9,000. They may have to consider extending the life to 10,000. That's one. Another effort, another initiative that's being prototyped as we speak is trying to take this myriad of disparate maintenance efforts, field events, depot events, which make no logical sense right now. All they do is guarantee that the aircraft is not available to the operating squadrons, because this week it's out for this inspection, they return it to the flight line, and that next day it's out for another inspection or a modification. So right now, NavAir is under work in prototyping 2 logical consolidated depot events to try and guarantee more aircraft availability on the flight line once they come out of that depot event. So that's looking very promising. And the rest is really driven by the extent to which our readiness accounts are funded in terms of spares, in terms of engineering disposition. That's another big one. A lot of time is wasted waiting for an engineer to reach back to NavAir proper and get engineering disposition on a certain risk event, and that consumes a lot of time. So, for instance, NavAir just put a second engineer down at Beaufort as just one example of some of the ways they're trying to mitigate that.
Great, my time's expired, but I appreciate it. Thank you, gentlemen.
And thank you, Congresswoman Sally. We now proceed to Congresswoman Elise Stefanik of New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for your service and for your testimony today. In the context of readiness, I want to focus on emerging threats, specifically in the 21st century battlefield. The Marine Corps operating concept acknowledges going beyond physical terrain and operating in the information domain. This is something that my subcommittee, the Emerging Threat Subcommittee, has spent a significant amount of time on. Can you describe how the Marine Corps is doing this and some of the challenges it has encountered in the cyber domain?
There have been a tremendous amount of challenges that we've encountered in the cyber domain, and that's the reason why we are eager to get the 3,000 Marines to get trained in cyber information operations and electromagnetic spectrum. And so what I would like to say, Congresswoman, is that when you talk about the cyber world, we're talking about the fight that starts now. We're in that fight right now. And so we put together 13 of these cyber teams. We expect them to be at FOC in 18. And that's to give us an offense and defense capability. But the most important aspect of it is that we are pushing those down to the Marine Expeditionary Force level so that they can operate and function, and so that we can train and prepare our Marine Air Ground Task Forces as they go out to be able to fight in that environment. That environment is very dynamic, it's ever-changing, and it's extremely complicated. And so as we move forward, there were a couple of things that happened, and I say thank you because you've given us the authorization to stand up a 3-star, and so the Commandant is standing up a Deputy Commandant for Information Operations in that field so that we can continue to expand our capability and also focus in on the challenges that we'll have and prepare us for the future threat.
Thank you for that. In the hearing at the full committee this morning, which was focused on the consequences of a continuing resolution, General Neller highlighted an interaction that he had with a Marine who specialized in cyber, who asked him, and I quote, "Sir, how can you afford to keep me?" That's extremely problematic, and that's extremely concerning for members of this committee. Can you talk about those challenges of maintaining Marines with specialized skills, such as those in the cyber field, and what options we can explore to retain them?
So I actually did hear that testimony this morning, and I heard the Commandant describe that situation. And he said that basically we're going to establish the same approach that we established with our special operators. And one of the things that we're doing is to allow Marines to stay in that field, to work in that field. For example, because of how we started and the different Marines that we pulled in to the particular MOS, we really need the opportunity, one, to develop the field. It takes a tremendous amount of training and schooling to get qualified in it. And so we're going to have to do several things. We're going to have to keep them in the billet, pay them their different types of bonuses and programs that you can establish so that you can keep the Marines in it, and allow the Marines to work in that field, because what they want, they just like pilots. Pilots wants to fly. Marines who are good in the cyber wants to work in cyber. But the competition, as you know, is out there, and we're not just competing against the other services, but we're competing against all the other businesses that are needing cyber expertise. So that's just a couple of the things that we're going to look towards to ensure that we can keep those Marines in that field. And it's a growing process, and when you give Marines the opportunity, they look forward to staying in that field and working in that field. And then you back that up with schools, jobs, and good command climate. They stay.
Absolutely. I think that increased flexibility is the right direction, particularly when there are opportunities outside of the military, certainly within the government broadly, but also in the private sector. And we want to make sure that our best and brightest continue to see opportunities in cyber within the Marines. So thank you for that answer, and I yield back.
Thank you, Chairwoman Elise Stepanek of the Emerging Threats and Subcommittee, Threats Committee. She does a great job, and we appreciate that. And I was happy that she referenced earlier today with the Joint Chiefs. And I want to commend each of you. You've really continued making the points that are so important to Chairman Mac Thornberry of where consistent funding be established, that indeed a long-term continuing resolution would be a threat to our military personnel, our military families, and a threat to readiness. And with this, we are now adjourned.